Hey guys, what's up? It's Ripe again. In today's video, a Karen accuses an army veteran of faking his disability and starts a fight with him. She even tries to steal his prosthetic leg. Here is what happened. Subscribe to Ripe on YouTube and hit the bell to turn on notifications. I was in the army for 5 years and unfortunately lost my leg after an unfortunate explosion. I have a prosthetic leg from the knee down, and after a lot of practice I have gotten good walking around on it without people really noticing. That does not mean it is easy though, so I still need seating that is close to doors or gives me room to stretch out my leg and avoid pain. One day I was taking a train ride a couple cities away to visit my mother for a holiday weekend. Driving is not an option for me, so I just got myself a train ticket and a nice book to enjoy the ride. It was pretty crowded, but I was able to get a disabled seat that gave me some extra leg room for the ride. I had done this ride before, so I was ready to just read my book, maybe listen to some music and relax. This Karen seemed to have totally different plans though. She got on after me and I could feel her sneering from a few seats away. After being in the army, you kind of got used to people that outrank you, yelling at you, so for me the sneering was not too bad. I knew she was not looking at my leg because I was wearing long pants, so I tried to figure out what her problem was. I would have been willing to let the entire thing go, but instead she got up out of her seat and stood right in front of me. A side note for people that don't know, messing with an army veteran is a really bad idea. We tend to not take crap from anybody, and if we are pushed, we are trained to push back even harder. I knew as soon as she opened her mouth that there was going to be a problem. Karen, you must feel pretty good about yourself. It's so typical of young people like you to take up any seat you want and get the extra room when there are people who actually need it and deserve it. I might look a little young, but this Karen was probably only 5 to 10 years older than I was at most. Me, ma'am, I'm going to tell you once and I will tell you nicely to get out of my face and return to your seat. Karen, don't think that because you're a man you can just tell me what to do. I'm a working mother and somebody like me deserves a seat like that. You look like you just sit on your butt all day and get whatever you want. I was still trying to remain calm and not look like a guy who is randomly screaming at women on the train. Me, this is a seat reserved for disabled people. Last time I checked, being a mother did not qualify you for a disability. So unless you want to pull out your ID to show that you're handicapped, you should just turn around and go back to your seat, Karen. Karen, how dare you? A young man like you cannot be disabled. You look perfectly fine to me. Give me your seat or I promise that when the train stops next, the cops will be getting on and arresting you for pretending to be disabled. This is when I finally could not hold back anymore and broke out the army voice. If anybody doesn't know what that means, imagine a puppy dog bark turning into a snarling wolf. I don't even need to be loud with it to scare the pants off of most people. I have a prosthetic leg after losing mine fighting for this country. Return to your seat now and leave me the hell alone. By now people were watching, and while I hate that I could tell by my last comment, anybody on her side probably shifted. She should have just walked away, but she didn't. Instead she went on a rant using horrible language, not the least of which constantly calling me a fake slur for disabled people that starts with C. She really thought I would do all of that over a seat, and by this point I was furious. That was when Karen made the biggest mistake in her entire life. She must have thought that if she pulled off my leg, she could prove that I had 2 fully functional legs and was lying this entire time just to get a seat. Chaos broke out as she grabbed me by the fake leg and at this point pulled up my pants enough to see that it was metal. She must have decided she had nothing to lose because she was still trying to yank it off of me, not having a clue how it worked. Honestly, at that point my instinct just kicked in and I grabbed her and threw her off of me. At this point people on the train were getting between the two of us because they probably saw my anger and were worried I was gonna hurt her. Instead though, I was in some pain because of all her pulling and messing around with my leg. I assumed that somebody called the police because when the train stopped a little while later, a ton of officers swarmed on to see what the issue was. At this point, I was back to sitting in my seat and Karen was back in her original seat with a ton of people ready to jump in at a moment's notice. Of course, in Karen fashion, before anybody else could speak, she started telling the police that I was faking having one leg in order to get a better seat on the train. When they looked towards me, I just pulled up my pants leg and they knew right away she was lying. I told them how she harassed and tried to assault me over my seat, as well as calling me derogatory names. The other passengers all had the same thing to say, and the only person with a different story was Karen. She was put in handcuffs for assault and taken off of the train, all the while sneering at me like when it all started. The policeman apologized and thanked me for my service before they got off and the train could continue to move again. They had my information and would call me a few days later to tell me what was going on with Karen. The rest of the ride was really quiet, and I think that some people were just in shock from what happened. I had a good weekend and a few days later got the call that since I was pressing charges, I would have to come to court and tell them my side of the story. With the other passengers giving testimonials and even one person recording it on their phone, it was easy to see that Karen was guilty. I guess she knew it too, because she took a plea deal and was now spending 2 years on probation and 200 hours of community service. I guess the busy single mom had plenty of leg room when she was sitting in lockup. And yeah guys, if I was that Karen, I would never go outside again because I would feel so embarrassed for what I had done. Anyway, let's continue on to the next story. And the next one is titled, "Should Not Have Fired Me." This is a lengthy story that happened to me, around 6 years ago. I applied for a job as a bar manager at a new resto bar that opened up in my area, which is Ontario, Canada. The owner of this bar had some issues with her liquor license being revoked at a previous establishment, and there was some sort of stipulation, this part I'm not clear on, where she was required to do the following. 1. Not be on site or involved in the business in any capacity for any reason. She was a prohibited person and I believe she made her husband the owner on paper, but for this story she is referred to as the owner. And next, hire a manager with 5+ years experience and a smart serve certificate to run and be responsible for the bar, in order to get another liquor license. After a short interview process, I was offered the job and was told of these terms. I accepted them despite the already apparent red flags. I was a very poor student. When the restaurant/bar opened, everything quickly fell apart. Despite the owner not being allowed to be on premises, she proceeded to micromanage both the kitchen and front of house. She stopped scheduling kitchen staff to save money and was working in the kitchen herself. Food quality plummeted, customers became irate at how long of a wait it was, and word spread quickly in the small town. Eventually, a select few regulars became our only customers. More hours got cut, waitresses and kitchen staff were let go. The owner was now drinking at the bar and at the same time was waitressing and cooking. This was all in the matter of a month. One night that month it was exceptionally nice out and we had a lot of boaters in the area. We had a pier near the bar where boats could dock and walk into the restaurant. A large group had walked in on this night and they were both very clearly underage and very clearly over-intoxicated. I immediately cut them off, to which they made a very large stink about it, enough that the owner's husband came over to ask what happened. I explained that I had cut the group off and was not going to serve them, to which the owner's husband decided to take their drink orders and serve them anyways. Obviously money was tight, so they didn't care about the rules. The next day, the owner pulled me into the office and accused me of stealing $50 out of the till the night previous. I knew this to be a lie that could be easily disproven because there is a camera located directly above the till that is synced to the timecode on the POS. I was fired on the spot. I 100% believe this was because I was refusing to serve customers and thereby damaging their bottom line. I was really miffed to be accused of doing something I didn't do and more upset that she used this lie she made up as an excuse to fire me. Because the stipulation of her having her liquor license was me working at the bar as a manager, I emailed the liquor control board when I got home and informed them of the rules being broken at the bar. A liquor inspector came to meet me later that week and took a statement. He then paid a surprise visit to the bar and was able to witness all of the things that I informed him, including the owner both being on site and being involved in the business, serving minors and serving intoxicated people. The liquor inspector slapped them with a very large fine, north of $50,000. Their liquor license was suspended and the owner was too broke to pay the fine and was forced to close the restaurant. I received death threats from her for a while after that, but the revenge was absolutely worth it. And yeah guys, I gotta say, that was brilliant revenge. And I gotta say, OP is definitely someone that you should not fire for BS reasons. The next one is titled Epic Revenge. I'm not sure if this one belongs here, as I was not the one who actually was wronged. My revenge was taken for someone I have never met, and I honestly don't know if they personally got any satisfaction from it. I do know what it did to the perpetrator and that it satisfied me, so I will let the readers decide. Like many of my tales, this one takes place in the distant past, before cell phones were common and before universal caller ID was the norm, in a time dinosaurs most likely roamed the earth. Well, the 80s at least. These things are very important to this story. Our tale takes place in a large West Coast city known for a big orange bridge and delicious sourdough bread. And by the way guys, maybe you can guess what kind of city that is in the United States. Anyway, I was living in the city for several months, working temporary duty for my company and was preparing for work on the day in question. As was my custom, I was getting dressed listening to the morning radio show on a local station. This station's jocks had started doing something called the Monday morning wake-up call, where on the first day of the week they would make a prank call on the air to a victim chosen from write-in suggestions from the listening audience. Doing this was actually very controversial in radio circles at the time. I had been a radio DJ in my hometown for a few years, and there are rules you must follow. One of the biggest rules is that you cannot make a false or deceptive radio transmission, like announcing an emergency, sending an SOS or cry for help or other such deceptions. Doing so is a federal offense, you can lose your license and be fined or even do jail time. It's a big no-no, the debate has long since been decided, but at the time, doing prank calls on the air was a grey area. There were people who were sure it constituted a false transmission, and some stations refused to do it. The argument was still alive at the time this happened. This day happened to be Monday, and the intended victim had been nominated by her husband. They had experienced a power failure at home earlier in the week, and the husband's suggestion was that the station call his wife, claim to be from the utility, and tell her that the power outage was somehow their fault and they would have to pay for it. The station staff loved the idea, and they proceeded to call the wife at her place of employment, which is a local bank. The victim answered and the prank began. "Hello, is this Mrs. Victim? I'm John Doe from Area Power Company. Do you remember having a power failure earlier this week? Well, it was due to a blown transformer on your block, and we have determined that the cause is a wiring fault in your house. We may have to cut off your power until you get it fixed, and also you will be charged for the transformer. The total cost is X $1,000. Would you prefer we put that on your utility bill, or do you want to make other arrangements to pay?" As you might imagine, the woman was shocked, then scared, and as she asked for more info, having trouble believing that they were going to have to pay thousands of dollars, "Would you prefer we put that on your utility bill, or do you want to make other arrangements to pay?" As you might imagine, the woman was shocked and then scared. As she asked for more info, having trouble believing that they were going to have to pay thousands of dollars, she got increasingly more upset. This egged the radio staff on. The guy making the call kept increasing the pressure on her more and more, eventually telling her that her power would likely be cut off until payment was made and that there might be a lawsuit. After several minutes, she suddenly hung up in tears. He called her back, and when she heard his voice, she hung up again, crying even harder. This time, the guy waited a minute and then called back again. Another lady answered the phone, a co-worker, and he asked to speak to Mrs. Victim. When the co-worker asked his name, he replied, "This is her husband," distinctive first name. The co-worker cursed at him and called him a liar and hung up. The radio studio was filled with laughter. The jocks thought it was hilarious. They took calls from listeners who were all laughing and talking about what a great prank it was. They finally got the husband on the phone, he of the distinctive name, and he was also laughing and joking that he would surely be sleeping on the sofa tonight. He was congratulating the radio staff on the fine job they had done terrorizing his wife. The radio hosts promised the listening audience that because the prank was so funny, they would certainly be playing the whole recorded prank again at noon. So be sure to be listening and call your friends. I, in my efficiency apartment listening to this, was getting mad. I was still pretty newly married and could not imagine doing something like that to my wife. All I could think of while the staff and listeners on the radio were laughing was that a few miles away, a young woman was in the ladies' room crying, probably with co-workers trying to calm her down. What made it worse to my mind was that the guy who set her up for this was the one guy in the world who should have her back, which is her husband. Anger turned to resolve and resolve formed a plan. I grabbed the city phone book, remember it's the 80s, and looked up 2 phone numbers. I called the first one. You may remember that I said I had been a radio disc jockey myself. It was a tiny dawn to dusk station, but I knew how stations worked. I knew what they liked, and more to the point, I knew what they didn't like. I also had done a lot of voiceover work and could sound professional as heck. The phone rang and was answered. You have reached Karen, radio jerk. I launched my attack. Me, professional voice. Yes, this is George Smith. I picked a more believable name. From the city office of the Federal Communications Commission. I've been getting some disturbing calls about your morning radio show and I need to speak to your program director to discuss it. Radio guy number 1 stammering. He's not here right now. Let me get you someone else. I was put on hold. Radio guy number 2 also stammering. Hi, hello? Yeah, this is radio guy number 2. Are you from the FCC? Me? Yes, this is George Smith from the city office of the Federal Communications Commission. As I told your coworker, I've been getting some disturbing calls about your morning radio show and I need to speak to your program director to discuss it. Radio guy number 2, short silence. He's not in yet. He'll be here at like 9 o'clock. Me, okay, well, I can start with your station manager since he will need to be in the conversation as well. Radio guy number 2, breathing fast, starting to lose all his composure. Oh, wow, yeah, he gets in at 9 too. I have him call you? He half asked and half pleaded. Me letting out what I hoped was a bureaucratic sounding sigh. Very well, I will expect to hear from him at 9. I will need to speak to your station manager, your programming director, and very likely your on-air personnel from this morning. I'll also need your station logs. Radio guy number 2. Oh yes sir, I will make sure he calls you right away. Me, alright, I'll be expecting his call. Here's my number. At this point, I gave Radio Guy 2 the second number I had looked up in the phone book, the main number for the city office of the Federal Communications Commission. Radio Guy 2 stammered his thanks and promises of phone calls, and we hung up. I went back to the radio. Jerk disc jockey. Oh, the FCC is calling. Well, they cannot do anything to me. I've got a year of pre-law in college and blah blah blah. He continued his defiance for a few minutes and then went to commercial. I kept listening. They stopped talking about the prank call, they stopped taking phone calls from listeners, they stopped talking to the husband, they started playing music, a lot of music. I listened for the rest of the day, they did not talk about it the rest of that day and they did not replay it at noon. In fact, for the rest of the week, I listened and heard nothing about it. I was a bit surprised. I figured that they might stop talking about it for a little while, but not altogether. It was not until later that I realized why they went so silent. I had scared them. In my quest to get a little vengeance for that crying woman I had never met, I scared them, but more to the point I had embarrassed them and Jerk Disc Jockey had helped. Once he went live with his bravado against a call from the feds, their listeners knew they had been called and heard the silence afterwards too. They were embarrassed because I had just done to them what they had done to her and they didn't want to have to admit it. I have kept the rather distinctive name of the husband a secret because I've always wished that I could meet that poor woman and that name would be how I would know it was really her. I doubt she is still married to the guy, but I would like to let her know in that place on that day someone had her back. And by the way guys, in the beginning I was not laughing at what the husband did to the woman, but rather the term efficiency apartment. I've never heard that before. I guess it's like a really minimalistic apartment? Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you again tomorrow.